and here at DBS Fishing Tips and Tricks, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about the basics of tube fishing. And this is what a typical tube will look like. This is a fairly large one. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is really what attracts fish to these tubes. Now, pretty much what attracts fish to these tubes is these tubes have sort of a really odd action to them. They can resemble mainly two types of baits, like a crayfish or a small baitfish. And these tentacles really sort of give it a good action to it. But really, tubes are a very good bait. Now first I'm going to talk to you guys about how to rig them. Now there's two ways of how to rig a tube. There are many other ways, but these are just the two main ways to rig a tube. Now the first way is just using a round head jig, which basically looks like this, or just a tube jig. This is a fairly small tube jig, but that's basically what a tube jig looks like. And either way it works, but I like using round head tube jigs, round head jigs. They work pretty well. And basically the way you rig it is there's always holes right under the tube, which basically allows you to put any baits in. You just slip that in the whole way until it goes the whole way up to the top. And this jig might not be big enough for this tube, but once you get to the very top, then just sort of push the eye of the jig out, and it basically will look like that. And now there's another way of basically rigging a tube, and this way is called Texas rigging. Now the first way I taught you is really good, but sometimes when you're fishing through like rocks and grass, you'll get caught a lot. That's why I use Texas rigging. And this is basically what it looks like. Basically, it makes it weedless. You can see the hooks just under it, and you basically hide the hook with a little bit of skin of the tube. Basically you rig this by taking one of these, you can use the Gamakatsu hooks, sort of these round curved hooks with this sort of curved right at the top, basically looks like this. And what you do, you basically just take the point hook, take the top of your tube, and just push the hook down until you get to that really edge of the hook right there. Then push the hook through the other side. Then once you pull it through the whole way to the very top of the eye of the hook, spin it around, and then take the bottom half and just stick it through the whole way of the tube, just like this. And now as you can see, this hook's not big enough for this tube. Basically just get the right size of hook, that's what I can recommend. And then basically what makes it weedless is the hook, you can see it's a little showing. So basically just take a little bit of the tube and push it in, and I'll basically just make it weedless. Now there's certain types of tube weights that'll go right into the tube. Basically, so it's weighted, because if you don't put weights on this, it'll just float on top. You can also use a worm weight, basically like this. If you're fishing like Texas rigged worms, this is what a worm weight will typically look like. But there are tube weights that'll basically just slip right into the tube. And you can also put rattles in these, which basically look like these small balled rattles. And even some of the weights that come with the tube will even have a rattle in it. So really you can customize it. So really those are the two main ways of rigging a tube. Now next I'm going to talk about the certain ways that you can fish a tube. Now there are mainly two ways to fish a tube. You can fish in any other way, but these are the two main ways. First one is called popping it. Now popping it is basically just, you basically just let this tube sit, well, as soon as it hits the water, just let it sit sort of at the bottom for about 3 to 4 seconds, and then just quickly pop it. Just keep doing that for a while until you get a fish. Now this way of fishing it basically represents a small bait fish like a minnow, or maybe a small shad, and basically that's one of the ways you can fish it. And if you don't catch a fish in a few minutes, maybe just try different ways. Maybe just pop it a little bit faster, or just maybe let it sit at the bottom for a little bit. Just really experiment with it. Now the next way you can fish a tube is basically just let it sit on the bottom or dragging on the bottom. There's not really a name for that, but this way basically represents a crawfish. So basically if you're going to do this, just let it sit at the bottom as soon as it hits the water, and sort of just drag it off the rocks. Sort of just dragging it slowly off the rocks, and every once in a while just sort of twitch it, just so it's sort of twitching off the bottom, maybe pop it just a little bit. This basically will represent a crayfish that's basically dragging off the bottom, and really, either way it works. One thing I would advise you is if you fish it like maybe fish it dragging off the bottom, you will get caught on a lot of rocks. So I would always recommend Texas rigging your tube if you're going to fish it like that. If you do it the other way, you'll just get caught a lot. Now those are the two main ways to fish a tube. You can find other ways, but those are just the two main ways. Next, I'm going to show you guys the certain colors that you should use for tubes. Now, the one rule of thumb for any fishing lure is really, if it's cloudy water, use bright colors, and if it's clear water, use very natural colors. So for tubes, it's the same way. So if you're fishing tubes in very cloudy water, use bright colors like this white, or maybe chartreuse green, neon, yellow, all those types of colors. Now if you're fishing in very clear water, just use very natural colors like brown, green, dull green, white, gray, all those different types of colors. Now, when you're fishing a tube a certain way, typically you want to have the right color, especially in clear water. So when you're basically popping a tube, that's going to represent a small bait fish. So you're going to make sure that you're using the right color. So if you're popping a tube, you might want to use this white, which basically represents a small minnow or maybe a bigger shad. Now, if you're dragging your tube off the bottom, that basically represents a crayfish. So you're going to want to use very brown, very natural colors. So just always make sure when you're fishing a tube you're using the right colors, and the certain way that you fish a tube will affect the color. So just make sure you're always fishing with the right colors. Next, I'm going to talk about the types of rods and reels that you should use while tube fishing. Now, when tube fishing, really, I wouldn't recommend using a bait caster unless you're casting really big tubes with really big weights. But typically tubes really aren't that big. So really, I would recommend using a spinning reel all the time. You don't really, the gear ratio and the ball bearings, you really don't need a very high gear ratio because you're not going to be reeling these things in a lot. You're mainly going to be popping them. The rod that I would recommend using is a medium to medium heavy, fast action, with at least 6 foot 6 inches in length or above. I would always recommend using a bigger rod than 6 foot 6 inches, mainly because a bigger rod that's bigger than 6 foot will allow you to feel very light strikes and still be able to get really good hook sets. Now, the rod and reel that I typically use, this is an all-around type of rod. I use this for a lot of types of fishing. Let me just turn around. It's a Shimano with a 6 foot 6 medium fast action. It's a really good rod, and this reel is a Shimano Shihara with a 5-to-3-1 gear ratio and has 3 ball bearings. I use this for really any type of fishing, tube fishing, grub fishing. Really, I would always recommend using a spinning rod and reel for if you're going to do grub fishing. Next, I'm going to talk about the types of brands that you should use while grub fishing. Now, the two main types of brands that I like to get is first Zoom. Now, Zoom, this is basically this is just one of the Zoom tubes looks like. Really, they make a lot of different types of soft plastics. They're really cheap too. And they're good high quality too. You can probably spend about, I'd say $4 for about 8 of these. These are the bigger ones. You can get like 13 of these for like $3 for the smaller ones. But Zoom is a really good brand of bait to get. And the next brand is the Bass Pro XPS. Now, I don't have a tube of the Bass Pro XPS or Tournament Series, but really they look the same as Zoom, except they're a little bit smaller. But Bass Pro XPS and the Tournament Series brands are really good. You can get about 10 of them for about $3. They're pretty good. I mean, you can get the really expensive brands like Strike King and stuff, but really you really don't have to spend a lot of money on soft plastics. And for your rod as well, I would recommend getting some of the good brands. I wouldn't recommend getting bad brands for rods because really it's gonna be really frustrating in the end. I'd recommend getting Shimano, Abu Garcia, even St. Croix. Now those are the more expensive ones. You can get the cheaper ones. One thing that I usually like to do is just go to my local tackle shop or Bass Pro and just ask the people that work there what types of rods to use for tube fishing or just any other type of fishing. So I would always recommend just going to your local tackle shop and just getting recommendations. It'll save you money and really help you in the end. And tubes, honestly, tubes are a really good bait. Typically I'll use them all year round. Really they're a versatile bait. They work well. You can catch a lot of smallmouth, largemouth. Mainly, I call a lot of smallmouth on these. But really, tubes are a really versatile bait. Well, I hope this video is very informational for you guys. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.